Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moykins from Big Mountain Studio, and today we're going to talk about navigation controllers. The main theme for this series is how to make the navigation controller look better, how to customize it to better match the theme or the look of your application. So this tutorial series will be broken up into 3 parts. The first part we'll talk about colors and customizing the colors of the navigation controller, and then we'll talk about how to customize it with fonts, and then we'll talk about how to customize it with your own back button. Alright, so let's get started with the first video, and we'll be talking about colors. Okay, before we get started, I'd like to thank our featured artist. His name is Julian, and he's from Dream Design. I found his work through Dribbble and Behance, and I really love his work. If you go to his website, julian.dreamdesign.me, you can see more samples of his work besides just what I feature in this video. As you can see, he's got a lot of great stuff. He's very talented. So feel free to head over to his website, julian@dreamdesign.me, and you can also check out his other social media outlets to see even more of his work. Thank you so much, Julian, for letting me use your work in this video series. First, we need to add a navigation controller to our app. Let me show you what we have so far. We're starting off with a basic application that tells a story. So we have 3 view controllers, and you can see we can navigate to the next one by clicking on this button down here with the footprints. And it takes you to the next page, and it starts a story. And it takes you to the next page, and then it doesn't go anywhere from there. There's only 3 pages or 3 view controllers. But you notice there's no way for me to go backwards if I want to reread the previous page. So that's why we're going to use a navigation controller so we can go backwards. Now notice on my storyboard, there's no navigation controller on it right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first view controller, and I'm going to embed that into a navigation controller by clicking on Editor, Embed In, and Navigation Controller. Like that. Okay, and notice how it changed my view controllers. It added this bar on the top. And now if I run the application, we have this bar at the top. There's no title, there's no text, we haven't given it anything. And if we go to the next pages, then the navigation controller supplies us with this back button to go backwards. Okay, that's good, that's exactly what we want. But notice, maybe these colors aren't really what you want to use. You don't want the white, maybe you don't want the blue. Maybe there's a better way to customize this color. Okay, so let's take a look here. I'm just going to give us a little bit more room here. Okay, now when you're dealing with the navigation controller, you have to select this navigation bar down here to actually edit its properties. Now one of your first options that you can choose that's really simple is you can just change the style from default, which is kind of like this white color that you see here, to black. And so it gives it a darker shade. Now notice there's something else that it changes too, and it changes the status bar color. The status bar, when we go back to default, is black. And when we ran the application, that status bar was black at the top. Let's run it again so you can see. So take a look at the status bar, the time. It's black up here. So if we change it to the style to black, it changes it to white. Now the color will also become more apparent if there were titles on these navigation bars. So normally what you do to add a title to your view controller, so it shows up on the navigation bar, is you want to give it a title right here in the view controller. But let me show you something. There's something a little bit different. So say we want to name this first page Fantastic Journey. Maybe that's the name of our application. Okay, nothing shows up here. But look at this. If I go to the second page, and maybe I call this Chapter 1, it shows up there. So why doesn't it show up over here? Well, this view controller, if we look at the document outline, it has an item called Navigation Item that the other view controllers do not have. So this is a little bit different. Here you want to click on this navigation item and supply the title for the navigation item. And then it shows up on the first one. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you want to change the title here, this title might not help you very much. The one you want to change is the navigation item itself. Okay, good. So here you can see it's white. And if we go back to our navigation bar here, and we change it back to default, the text changes back to black. So that's one option that you have with colors. But maybe you want to go a little bit further, and you want to change the actual color of the navigation bar itself. So what you can do is you can change the bar tint. And it's kind of like a weird name for it, tint, right? Usually we have tint down here, which changes the colors of our buttons or things that are actionable. So really think about bar tint as the navigation bar background color. And we'll see here if we change it to something, it takes effect right away. So maybe we want a color that more matches this screen. So what we'll do is we'll just come here and, I don't know, we'll just pick one of these colors. Okay, there you go. And if we run it, let's see what it looks like. Okay, this matches a little bit better. But for our application, maybe it won't work so well because when we go to the next page, you notice it's still the same color that was used on the previous view controller. So maybe we want to not use this color because it doesn't really match all of our different pages that we have in our application. So instead, how about if we just have no color for it and no color for it at all? Well, let's try to do that. Let's go back to our navigation bar. And maybe we can set the color to a clear color. Whoa, look at that. Okay, the clear color doesn't really help us in this case. You might have thought that if you set it to a clear color, then you might have a transparent navigation bar. But it doesn't quite work that way. So instead, what we'll have to do is we'll have to use a different property. So the property that we actually need to change to give it a clear background isn't in the attributes inspector. So let's change this back to default for now. And what we'll have to do is we'll have to code it. And where I'm going to set this property is going to be on the first view controller. Right here. Okay, now I just want to explain something to you. Every view controller has a navigation controller property. But just because it has a navigation controller property doesn't mean that you're actually using a navigation controller in your application. So this is an optional property. It can be nil. So as you'll see here, I start typing in navigation controller, and there it is. There's a property. It's a property of the UI view controller. But it is nil, or it's optional. So it might not have a value. But in this case, we know we do have a navigation controller. And from there, we want to access the navigation bar. And the navigation bar is basically this control right down here. So here's your navigation controller, and then here's your navigation bar. Then what we want to do is we want to set the background image. This should work just fine. So what image should we set it to? Well, in this case, it's just going to be a blank image. We don't actually have an image. We're just going to set it to an image that has no image, an image object that has no image. And for bar metrics, we're just going to select default. Okay, let's see what that gives us. All right, great. That did it. That got rid of the background color. All right, great. Now notice, we have chapter 1 here, but when we go to the next screen, we don't have any text up here because we didn't give it, this view controller, a title property. Okay, so do you notice anything else here that we might have to handle or take care of, or that we can use to make this look better? Yeah, you might have noticed that there's this line here. And this line is called a shadow image. The shadow image is an interesting property. It's actually an image, so what they used here is probably like a repeating thin image that goes all the way across. Well, we want to get rid of that. But before we get rid of it, I just want to show you a little bit of how it works. The shadow image is on the navigation bar, but if we come here, we notice there's no property for it, so we have to set it in code again. And we just access it the same way. We're changing the navigation bar. For this one, I started to make a mistake because I automatically start to go to set whenever I want to change things. But for this one, it's a little bit different. You actually don't need set. You can just access the shadow image directly. And before I set it to an empty image, I want to set it to our footprints like that we have down here. This one right here, step forward. And I'm going to use an image literal just to give you guys an idea of what this looks like. And it might be something good to keep in mind because maybe you want to customize your navigation controller with your own image instead. There we go. So as you can see, it takes the image and it repeats it going all the way across your your view controller. So that is an option if that's something you can use in your app. But for us, we're just going to leave it blank. We're going to set it to a blank UI image. Like that. And then if we run it, that should just get rid of it altogether. There we go. Okay, that's a lot better. So we still have some work here though, right? Because if you look at this screen, maybe this blue color is something that is not necessarily desirable. It doesn't really match our app. And also if we come here, this chapter 1 is really hard to see. So maybe we want to change that to white. And an easy way to change it is if we come back here to our navigation bar, we can change the style to black. And our text will change to white. But there's another way to change this color too. So that only gives you two options, white text or black text. But what if you want to change it to your own custom text color? Well, you have another choice. So if you have navigation bar selected, you can come over to the attributes inspector and you'll see this title color. So maybe you want a gray color instead. You can choose light gray. And this, you won't see the change on your storyboard. Instead, you have to run it to see those changes. Okay, so not only can you change the title color, you can also give the title a shadow. So for example, if we give this black, then this will give it a black shadow. But take a look at this. Let's run the application and see what that title shadow property does. It doesn't do a darn thing, does it? That's because the offset is positioned in such a way that the shadow is exactly behind the text. In order to make that shadow appear, you have to change the default position to custom offset. And then, like offset so it goes down 1 and over 1. And if we run it again, you should see a black shadow behind the text. There you go. Can't really see it on this one because this page is dark. Okay, I'm going to take that shadow off because I don't really like it that much. So I'll just go back to the default. I'll change that. I'll change this back to default as well. And for the title color, I don't think I'm going to use the light gray. So I'm going to change that back to default. And I'll keep the style as black so my text remains as white. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this background. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it like this, where there's no background and no bar to it. Okay, there's one last color change that I want to make. Now notice when we run the application, everything looks good. We have our white font. But then here it shows this bright blue color. And that's the default tint that they give to actionable controls or things that you can tap on. And I don't really like this color right here. So I want to change that. And in order to change that, as you might have guessed, you just change the tint color. So if you go back to the navigation bar, you'll notice there's a tint color right here. And this is what controls the color of that back button. So I think what we're going to do for now is we'll just change it to white. And then if you run it, you can see what that looks like. Okay, now it's white. Now, there is something I do want to point out. This isn't a good practice. Having your actionable items, the things that you can interact with or tap or touch, you want them to be a separate color from the rest of the elements in your application. Because if you look at this, everything is white and you can't tell, or the user might not be able to tell, well, can I click on chapter 1? Can I click on this text? You know, because they all look like the same. So you actually want the things that you can tap or interact with, you want them to be a different color than the rest of your items. So this is actually a bad practice, and you might see this when you look at different designs and mockups. It's an easy thing to do. You know, you make everything that you can interact with the same color as regular text that you can't interact with. And I just want to let you know that this is a bad practice. But we will be changing this in one of the upcoming videos when we customize this back bar. So I'm not really worried about it right now. All right, great. That wraps it up for this video. You learned about how to customize the navigation bar so you can change the colors, change it from light to dark, change the color of the titles, set titles for your view controllers. And you also learned how to get rid of the navigation controller color itself, or how to get rid of the navigation bar itself. So you have what we have now, it's just the title. For the next video, we'll talk about custom fonts and how to customize this title on your pages. And after that, we'll also be customizing this back button, because right now it looks kind of ugly. You know, it's kind of big, it pushes over chapter 1, and we don't really want that. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Consider sharing it with your friends or on social media. And if you'd like to help out this video or this channel, consider adding a translation for the title and the description of this video. All right, thanks guys.